Hello and welcome to the Tough Girl Podcast, a 3-time award-winning show that aims to motivate and inspire you while increasing the amount of female role models in the media, especially in relation to adventure and physical challenges. I'm your host, Sarah Williams. If you're passionate about adventure, challenge and learning from women who have overcome obstacles and achieved remarkable things, then this is the podcast for you. Every Tuesday at 7 a.m, new episodes go live featuring incredible women who share their stories, insights and tips to help you achieve your dreams and goals. You can support the Tough Girl mission by signing up as a patron. Visit Patreon, patreon.com/Tough Girl Podcast. Keep listening until the very end as I share more information about what's going on with me with Tough Girl Challenges, give shout outs and recommend other Tough Girl Podcast episodes. More information can be found at toughgirlchallenges.com.
I'm Stephanie Quintrell. I'm currently based in Rutland in the East Midlands. We live on an army base here as my husband's serving. My job, I'm operations manager for not-for-profit Forces Rise Challenge, and also got lots of other exciting things going on.
We are going to be delving in to all of those exciting adventures and challenges. But I'll just remind people of when we last spoke. So we first spoke to you on June 20th in 2023. That's when the episode came out. And during that episode, you shared more about your early years, being a mum, working as operations manager for Forces Wife Challenge. You also shared more about how your life was turned upside down when you were diagnosed with a neurological disorder and how you went from being an active, full-time working mum and keen horse rider to being dependent on a wheelchair, requiring more care, this sort of life-changing instance, which we discussed in quite a lot of detail in our first episode. But in that episode as well, you also shared more and talked more about Ride to Freedom. We are going to jump in right at that point. I would love you to share a little bit more about Ride to Freedom, because the last time we spoke, you were soon to be heading off on that adventure. So tell us a little bit more about Ride to Freedom, what it is and what's involved in that challenge.
End of June last year, alongside 7 other military wives, I headed out to France, and this was an expedition with Forces Wives Challenge. And we set out at the end of June. We went and started in the Pyrenees, and we rode for 5 days, a horse rode for 5 days across the Pyrenees, following the World War II freedom trails. So they were escape routes used by downed airmen and women and Jewish refugees during World War II that were escaping over the Pyrenees in fear of their lives. They're escaping to safety. So we followed a lot of those trails, and we rode for 5 days across the mountains. We rode from France across the border into Spain. We covered about 130 kilometres over that 5 days. We were spending 7 hours in the saddle. It was a massive success. It feels like a long time ago now. It's a year ago now, really. So it feels like a bit of a world away, but it was an incredible challenge and a massive achievement for me and for the whole team.
Take us back to your feelings before the adventure, because this is something that, that you've been training for a long time. You sort of your first adventure, being away from your husband, sort of your main sort of support system, and heading out on this horse riding ride. Is that even a horse riding ride to take on this challenge? What was going through your mind at that time?
Because I created Ride to Freedom, I created the challenge. I was obviously getting ready for it from day one of planning it, which was back in the early 2022, late 2021. We started planning, and therefore I started training because, as you said, I've got my disability and my health conditions, and it takes a lot more for me to be able to get fit enough to be able to manage what we were aiming to do during Ride to Freedom. So I'd been preparing for it for a long time. And I think actually, because I'd been physically preparing myself for a long time, as in getting as many hours in the saddle, riding my horse, working out at home, really, really building my stamina and my fitness levels, I think that I probably, in the run up to it, didn't consider the emotional side of how I needed to prepare. Because I can remember thinking, I was kind of just along for this ride, and it was really busy, and, in the run up to it, the preparation, and I had this incredible team that we'd formed, and we'd really bonded in the run up to it. We'd worked really hard on that kind of team relationship, because I knew that they were going to need to help me a huge amount. I needed a lot more help while we were out there, but for obvious reasons. I mean, I can't weight bear, so I can't get myself up in the saddle. I needed to be lifted in and out the saddle. I knew that the mountains and the environment we'd be staying in each night was not going to be wheelchair accessible. Physically, I think, we had it down. We'd worked really hard and I'd worked really hard physically. And then I can remember it being a few weeks out and I suddenly had this real, I suppose it was a bit of a realization that, oh, actually, I'm going to go do this. And I'm going with the team of ladies and leaving my husband behind. And as you say, he'd been my primary carer since I became ill. So I think that was a far bigger deal than I anticipated it would. I really grew from that experience, to be honest. I mean, if I look at where I'm at now and what I've done in the time since Ride to Freedom, my confidence improved. I'm pushing myself out there more because I realised that, yes, I need support from other people. I physically need support. Actually, it doesn't have to be my husband. I've got incredible friends that were, that I made out of that team that were more than happy to support me how I needed. So actually, maybe I wasn't as mentally prepared for that side of it in the run up to it, but I think that was probably where I grew as a person the most.
One of the first challenges, I suppose, that you needed to face wasn't actually, sort of getting on the horse. It was probably getting on the plane. And actually, how was that flying portion, flying disabled, flying with a wheelchair? What was that like?
Absolutely terrifying. That scared me more than riding on the edges of mountains and, with cliffs and things like that. The flying was terrifying. I hadn't flown since becoming disabled. So it was my first experience of flying with a wheelchair. You read all these horror stories online about wheelchairs being broken during flights. I had an incredible wheelchair that was funded by charity, this wonderful wheelchair that was going to be able to be carried on horseback, so super lightweight. And it was literally everything I needed for the challenge and actually for ongoing for all the active things I do. And I just had this absolute fear that it was going to get damaged on the flight, because if it gets damaged on the flight, well, that's me. I can't even get off the plane. It was really, really scary. I spoke with the airline a lot beforehand and on the day, and actually it was a huge amount more successful than I thought it would be. The wheelchair didn't get damaged. It was actually allowed on the plane, went into like a cupboard they had on there. So I was very lucky that the flying bit actually went very well, but that was definitely one of the challenges I was really dreading. It's not even like I was, just a little bit nervous. I was absolutely dreading it. So when we got to the other end, when we arrived in France and they got me off the plane, because you have to go on this funny little wheelchair thing that fits down the aisles, and then I transferred back into my wheelchair to go into the airport. And I could just remember just having this really emotional response of just sitting back in my wheelchair and feeling like I got my legs back again and it wasn't broken and I could move again. It was a really scary time.
That sense of relief of just like, oh, everything's arrived in one piece, because you do see those horror stories. So I can, definitely understand that stress. And like you said, it's been a while since you've flown. So you've landed in France. I'm assuming you didn't fly the horses over. You were going to be borrowing, or maybe you did.
No, we didn't. We were using, so our guide and provider was someone called Govan, absolutely incredible man, who breeds and trains his own horses. They're all the breeders, the Marennes, and they're one of the breeds of the Pyrenees. So they are the most incredible little horses that I've never seen horses be able to manage to cover ground like they do, the type of terrain that they do. So we were using his horses and he was taking us on the expedition. We arrived, Govan met us at the airport actually, and we the first challenge when we got out the airport was we all had to get into Govan's, like a big high Land Rover type thing. As I wheeled up next to it and looked at the seat height, realising I had to try and get into this vehicle, it was challenging. Let's say that. We had to kind of throw me up and one of the girls basically sort of pushed me in. That in itself was quite a challenge, which funny, isn't it? That all these things that are challenging but actually had nothing to do with the actual physical adventure across the mountains. It was all the bits in the run up to it.
Tell us about your horse that you were going to be working with for the challenge.
So we were all allocated a horse on the first day. So Govan, I don't know how he matched everyone up, but he managed to, and it seemed very good. The horse that they were matched with just seemed to suit them perfectly. So he had this incredible way of just knowing what each of us needed. Because although the horses are all trained in the same way, as we know, animals are all different. They've all got their own quirks. I was paired up with one horse who I actually spent the first 3 days riding. And then I actually changed horses. I was the only one that changed horses halfway through the week because I had to stay in the saddle all the time, apart from one terrifying bridge crossing, which I'm sure we can talk about. Whereas all the other girls, so at times over the last 3 days, and especially on the last day, had to get off and walk because the tracks weren't ideal for horses to travel on. So they all had to get off and walk large portions of it. Obviously, for me, that couldn't happen. So Govan had the two horses that I would ride. So I rode one for the first 3 days. He was called Black Velvet. And then I rode Balboa on the last 2 days. So that was the horse that Govan had been riding. It was his horse. So we'd swapped over just because obviously the horse that I was riding had to work a lot harder because they weren't getting any time with the rider not on their back.
Take us back to the expedition, and for you as well, like, I suppose that was there this moment of realization, like being out in the mountains when you were like, I'm doing this, like, oh my God, like this is, did you have that moment? Did that happen for you?
Definitely. Day one, we'd had all these challenges of getting there, the flying, the vehicle there, the getting into we spent the first night in Govan's like mountain accommodation, just the logistics of it had been really quite difficult, doable, but difficult. And I guess everything in the run up to an expedition of this size is stressful. You've got to get the funds in, you've got to get all of the media stuff done. So we did a lot of, different media things in the run up to the week. So, before actually getting there and actually doing the challenge, there'd been a huge amount that had needed doing that had been stressful. And I suppose on that first day, I can remember, when we then got me into the saddle, and you've got to bear in mind, these horses had never seen a wheelchair before, ever. It's not something they're familiar with. So on the first day, as they were all led in, all the horses looked like they were absolutely terrified of me because it's completely different. They got used to me very quickly, very adaptable horses. But, the first time we had to lift me up onto the horse, obviously that horse had never had someone been mounted by 3 people lifting them up. So even that was challenging. I remember when we got me up in the saddle and I was sat up there and I was all set up, and I can remember going, oh, now I can breathe again, because actually the horse riding part wasn't the bit that was worrying me. That's the bit that I know once I'm in the saddle, I'm capable of. Once I'm in the saddle, I don't need any extra support whatsoever. I'm competent and capable. So I had my adaptive reins that I was using. But other than that, once I'm in the saddle, I'm just the same as everyone else. So actually, I remember on that first day, we all got on. It was all a bit kind of that first day tacking them up because they were different tack, different saddles. And we got on. And I can remember as we started our ascent into the mountains from his kind of accommodation and we were kind of off tracks, I can remember sort of turning around and looking at the whole team and just smiling and thinking, yeah, we made it. We made it. Yes, now we've got to get through the week, but we made it here and we're actually doing it. Because I think, especially being the organizer of an expedition like this, there's so much stress goes into, we need to make it happen before we can even get there. So I can just remember smiling, looking around and smiling at everyone and just thinking, yeah, we're actually doing it now.
So are you actually like strapped onto the horse? You can't use your legs, so you can't squeeze your thighs or anything. So is it all just done through the reins?
So no, I'm not strapped onto the horse. So I ride exactly the same as any other rider does. The only bit that's different for me is my reins, the right rein, because I've got no use in my fingers on one of my hands, my right hand. I ride in a fixed splint on that hand. So I've got reins that have got loops on them on that side. So basically I hook my splint into that loop on the rein. And that means I can ride two-handed like everyone else can. Other than that, I have no specialist equipment at all. I just ride exactly the same as anyone else does. So once I'm in the saddle, I ride the same. I can move my legs, but I've got absolutely no strength in them. So I can't weight bear. They're not particularly very useful. However, I've got exceptional core strength and balance. So this is something that I had to work on when I started riding again as a disabled rider, was that I can't rely on the other parts of my body, my hands, my legs. And although we shouldn't as riders, if we're riding correctly, we should be riding from our core. It's easy to be a bit lazy with it. So when I started riding again, I had to really focus on using my core strength, building that balance, because actually that's what keeps me on the horse. So in answer to that, no, I don't ride any differently. I'm certainly not strapped on or anything like that. I'm riding the same, but I just have to ride correctly from my core rather than relying on anything else.
And you mentioned, at some points the tracks were quite scary and that, the other riders would get off and walk and you didn't have that as an option. So how did you deal with that sort of fear, being high up on a horse on sort of scary tracks, maybe like looking down into a gorge or a valley or off the edge of a mountain? What happened in those sort of situations?
Yeah, that was exactly what it was like. The girls had to walk for short bursts on the third day in. That was our longest day in the mountains when we were fighting to get to the top of the mountain before a thunderstorm that we knew was coming in, which obviously we wanted to be up there, settled in tents, sorted before this storm came in really badly. So it was a hard day. That third day was the longest day in the saddle. So they had to walk for parts of that. They walked for a little bit more on the fourth day, and they walked for quite a lot on the fifth day. On the third day, when they were getting off to walk, I had this feeling of real kind of guilt that they were having it harder than me because they were walking. Because, like I said, once I'm in the saddle, I'm just as capable as any other rider. So I'm very comfortable in the saddle and I can go all day long riding. So I was sitting there having a great ride while they were walking up mountains. And I remember saying to a couple of girls, I was like, I actually feel really guilty. I feel like I've got it really easy in comparison to you girls having to walk. And I remember them sort of saying, no, it's not like that at all. Anyway, it was the next day when we were coming down the mountain to ride into France, and it was getting a little bit scarier. And I remember going, oh, maybe I don't get the better end of the deal, and sort of just thinking to myself. And then on the fifth day, we rode back into France and we descended 1,000 meters in 3 hours. So that gives you an idea of how steep the tracks were that we were coming down. And on that last day, we were actually riding on like animal tracks, like goat tracks. They'd never been ridden by a horse. And we were all coming down, and it was at points really, really scary. They were awful tracks to ride. And I remember turning around, I was right at the very front. And I remember turning around at one point and looking to one of my team members behind and going, actually, I totally get what you mean. I have not got the better end of the deal. And they were going to me, Steph, even if we had the option to ride, we'd be getting off and walking right now. Like, you definitely have it harder being up there, because balancing coming down a mountain that steep is very, very hard. But also just that kind of the horses slipping and stumbling, because the track that we're riding down is not, well, it's like a goat track on the sort of traversing across this mountain to come down. And I remember thinking, actually, I don't have the better end of the deal here. And then when we got to the bottom and we were finishing, I just remember having this massive sigh of relief, thinking, that's okay, it's over now. That bit's over now. There were times that were quite hairy, let's put it that way.
So if you're in the saddle going steep downhill, I'm imagining that you're having to almost like lean back. And so that will be for 3 hours? You must have abs of steel.
Oh, it was absolutely exhausting. Yeah, basically, you're coming down steep hills, you need to be like leaning back. And I've got some great GoPro footage actually that I looked at afterwards, because I've got like one hand on the rein, one hand out, leaning so far back. Someone took the GoPro footage from behind me because I'm just trying to keep myself balanced. Because the second horse I rode, Barbara, I've never ever sat on anything like it. He was so unbelievably sure-footed, so good on his feet. Like, it was amazing. And this is why I rode those two of Govan's, because he knew that I was going to have to stay on. I went on the most experienced in the mountains purely for the fact that they were the ones that were going to be the safest to be able to ride down the mountains. And like I said, I've never felt anything like it. Riding Balboa was just unbelievable. But you're sort of looking down off the edge of a cliff and you're leaning back and you're exhausted, and it was tough, but it was incredible. And looking at the footage now, I'm a little bit like, oh, I can't believe I did that actually.
So if you're with your core muscles and did they have to be constantly like actively engaged, or like how, like, because that must have just like, or wait, if you relax them, would you lose balance? Or so basically, were you constantly having to keep them engaged, like, or were you able to like not relax? Could you relax in the saddle when you were going down for like that 3 hour stretch?
No, not when we were going downhill. Like, I had to be on it the whole time. And yeah, so basically, my core strength is what was keeping me balanced and in the saddle. So no, when we're riding down, there's no relief from that. But when we were riding on flat parts throughout the week, or parts that were maybe only slightly uphill, the easier parts, then I could relax more. But I ride from my core, I ride from that strength. So actually for me, those muscles that I'm using are engaged all the time, because that's what's keeping me in the saddle and keeping me upright.
One of the things that you mentioned at the start was about a bridge crossing.
Yeah. It was really, it was scary for different reasons. So on that third day, the weather was horrendous. It was really, really bad, awful weather, and we were heading up the mountains. We knew that there was this bridge crossing, so all the other obstacles, so sort of little rivers and things like that, I'd stayed on when the other girls jumped off and then got back on the other side of it. But this one was there was absolutely no way you could ride across this river crossing. That had this little bridge, like a little wooden bridge, wasn't going to be wide enough for my wheelchair. I called on my inner mum from climbing around soft play with my little boy and was like, don't worry, I'll just bum shuffle across there. It's no problem. So we got me off the horse, straight down onto like the steps of this bridge. And then I quite literally bum shuffled the whole way across this bridge, and it was soaked. So I was just even wetter by the end of the bridge. I sat on the steps the other end and waited, and all the horses had to come across this river. But I mean, it wasn't like what you'd imagine a river to be, a nice little flat, peaceful river that the horses can toddle through. These were like big slabs of rock and the river coming down off the mountains. And the horses, they had to be led across it and often had to be let go so they could go across it on their own. So Govan was like herding them across one at a time. And it was absolutely terrifying to watch these horses cross. I mean, they all came out, no injuries, and they've done it before, and Govan knows his horse's capabilities. But I remember sitting on the edge of this bridge, and all the other team were like, holding the horses at one side or the other side and helping them get on and off. And it was really, really scary.
You mentioned a couple of sort of like quite sort of scary situations, but where you might have felt almost like a little bit fearful. How do you manage your emotions? Like, what did you figure out? What are the tips and tricks? What have you got in your toolbox that you rely on?
At the time, certainly for me, when I'm in the moment, when I was there and I'm physically doing it, like that last day where I'm coming down off the mountain and it is literally like a sheer drop next to me, I definitely wasn't as scared in that moment as I was then looking back afterwards, so looking at the footage of it or reliving it, talking about the bridge crossing and imagining watching the horses go across. I think at the time I was very much just in the moment, just getting that in that mindset of I'm here, I need to do it, let's get on with it. It's calculated risk, isn't it? Adventure is any adventure, any sort of outdoor expedition, challenge, whatever, there's a level of risk. We know that, and we mitigate risk where we can, but we know that there's a level of risk. The same as horse riding. Riding my horse on a day-to-day basis, there is a level of risk there because there is of everything. And I think I knew when I was riding, when I'm in the saddle, I know that's where I'm at my most capable. When I'm riding, I don't feel disabled because actually I'm riding and I've got that horse as my legs. For me, being in the moment and just I know my own capabilities. I knew I was as safe in the saddle as I could be. So just kind of really living in that moment and kind of just going through that each step. I think it was afterwards when we were reviewing the footage and that it kind of hit me a little bit quite how scary a few of the moments have been during that week.
We're coming up to almost like a year since you took on this incredible challenge across the Pyrenees. And I suppose that's given you some time maybe to reflect back. And, at the start you did mention that, you definitely sort of helped to build your confidence over the last 12 months. But what are some of the other lessons and takeaways, that you've brought home with you from that adventure that you've managed to sort of use in your everyday life?
I've got a lot more independence back since, I suppose in the run up to Ride Freedom and since, because I've realised what I'm still very capable of doing despite my disability. There are things that I will never do again because of my disability. I'm never going to walk again. I can't drive a car. I can't, so there are things that I can't do, but there is a huge amount that I can do. For me, the biggest learning point for me was about asking and accepting help. So it's something that I really, really struggled with before Ride Freedom because I guess for me, it felt like admitting that I needed help and support with something. It almost felt like I was admitting failure. I was admitting I can't do it, which is why I never liked anyone helping me. And I was very in my comfort zone with my husband helping me or my mum. And I did learn about it beforehand, but mostly on the expedition night, at the beginning of the week, I was still really struggling with that. I knew that the team had to help me, physically help me. I knew they did. But I was really struggling with being able to say, I need help with that. I need support with that. And actually, by the end of the week, I just had this real realization that if I ask and accept help, then look how successful I can be. And that's what I've really taken forward into my everyday life. And I think that that's a really good learning point for everyone. So take disability out of the equation. We all need support for something. So I was able to provide, let's say, emotional support to the other ladies on the team. I was still bringing something. They still needed something. Okay, fine. They didn't need help getting on and off a horse, but they needed support in some way to get through the week. And actually, if you take that into your everyday life, there's always things that we're going to need to support us to be able to be successful. And if we acknowledge that we need help, ask for it and take it, actually, we could be far more successful than if we try and kind of soldier on and just do it ourselves.
One of the amazing things that you've done since coming back is you have also founded your own non-profit. Would you like to share more about having this idea, putting it into practice, and what your non-profit is going to be focused on?
We founded it in December. Been going a little while, not long. We're still very new. It's still very early stages. So it's called Equine Power Adventures. And basically it came about because I came back from Ride Freedom, and we were really lucky that I got lots of kind of media coverage, and I was able to share the journey in some magazine articles and bits and pieces. I realised that what I'd done, what I'd gone out and achieved. So I achieved the kind of, I suppose you'd call it, a title of the world's first wheelchair dependent person to horse ride across from France to Spain. And it was massive, and people loved hearing about it. And although I struggled with this whole being an inspiration before Ride Freedom, I used to cringe when someone would say that I'm inspiring or I've inspired them. I used to find that really difficult. Actually, when I got back and I realised that people wanted to hear about my story, they wanted to hear about that success, they wanted to hear about what's possible, because it is inspiring them and educating them around disability awareness and all these different things. And so when we came back, I kind of realised that, hang on a minute, what we've done has reached so many different people. And then it got us thinking so there's two sides to Equine Power Adventures. So there's the side of being able to use the physical challenges that I'm doing, so using those experiences to be able to go out into wider communities and actually educate around what's possible with a disability, inspire other people. So there's this side of it, that kind of education and inspiration piece on that. But also it got me thinking about, there's got to be other disabled people that are horse riders, that are competent horse riders, that are not wanting to do kind of mainstream para equestrian activities. So maybe they don't want to do para dressage. And really, for disabled people that are riders, you've got para dressage and para show jumping is not as big. And then you've got RDA centres. Now, I'm very, very lucky. I have my own horse, Bubba, who is incredible. But if I didn't have her, where would I go to ride? Because actually, I'm a competent and capable rider. I wouldn't want to go to a riding school and ride a riding school horse. They've got their place 100%. But actually, that wouldn't be challenging for me. That wouldn't be the right way to go about riding. So I started thinking about, okay, well, I'm really lucky that I've got Bubba, and I'm very lucky that I was in a position with Forces Rise Challenge to create Ride to Freedom and go off and do this huge adventure and experience this life-changing adventure, because it really was. But there's got to be other people like me who that's what they want to do. They're disabled, but they are a horse rider, and they want to go and have an adventure. They want to challenge themselves, whether that's getting back on a horse and riding in the countryside for an hour in the UK, or whether that's going over and doing an overseas expedition. That bit I'm figuring out where we go with that, how much the demand is. Me and my husband just thought there's got to be a demand for it. And when you look it up, I can't really find anything other than sort of the mainstream para-equestrian activities. So that's where we're going with it. That's the hope. That's the plan, that we want to provide opportunities for disabled riders to do something that they love, that's outside of mainstream para-equestrian.
You've planned your first adventure, which sounds amazing. Would you like to share more about that?
This will be our flagship expedition that I will be going on with a team of ladies. So we go in February 2026, going out to Argentina. We're riding a historical route across the Andes from Argentina to Chile. We'll be in the mountains for 7 days. There's no bunkhouse accommodation like we had for some of the days at Ride to Freedom. We'll be camping every night. Everything we need gets carried with us on the horses and on mules that are used as like the pack horses. My wheelchair will be carried with us, and we do 7 days out in the mountains. It's going to be tough. I mean, in classic, what I'd say Steph style is, the next one's always got to be bigger and harder or whatever. So, as if it wasn't difficult enough, I just thought, I'd put some extra difficulty level in there. We're riding to 4,400 meters up. So we're going into territory of altitude sickness and things like that. So there's a lot of extra challenges, but it's really, really exciting. And my hope with this is through doing that, I will be able to secure the support that we need as an organisation to then be able to start offering overseas expeditions to other disabled people. So I'm really excited about that. I'm really excited that I will be able to use that adventure to do more of going out and doing that, educating and inspiring different communities as I have with Ride to Freedom. So we're kind of ticking that side of it off, and then hopefully we'll be able to get the support we need and the funding we're going to need to then be able to provide these adventures to other disabled riders.
You are on social media. Where can people find out more information about you, about Equine Power Adventures? Where should they connect with you online?
We've got our website, equinepoweradventures.org. We are on Facebook and Instagram, just under Equine Power Adventures. So do look us up on there to follow what we're up to. Also, I mentioned Ride to Freedom is the expedition through Forces Wives Challenge. So we are also Force Wives Challenger on social media as well. So it would be great to follow along because we're doing some other really exciting adventures with our community. So two sides of it there, really.
And Steph, I'd love for you to have final words of advice, final words of wisdom for other women out there, for other horse riders, for the disabled women, for other adventurers. What would you like to share with regards to like getting outside more, stepping outside your comfort zone? Apart from just do it, what would you like to say?
That stepping outside your comfort zone is really, really important. And that's something that I've really learned with my job with Forces Wise Challenges. We have women going off and doing lots of different challenges. And some of them, that stepping out their comfort zone will be getting out the house, driving in their car to a one-day event. And that to them is a really big step outside their comfort zone. Then you've got someone that will go and take on a huge overseas challenge, and that to them is. But one thing that in pushing yourself out of your comfort zone and going into that uncomfortable space, you are opening yourself up to incredible experiences and also to those kind of learning experiences about yourself. Going back to Ride to Freedom, I knew physically what it was going to take to get through the week. And I'm really proud of myself physically for getting through that week and achieving it and being successful. But I definitely underestimated the positive mental impact it would have on me. And then actually all those things moving forward, you know, just because I'm now not currently in the Pyrenees riding, it doesn't mean I'm not still pushing myself out my comfort zone and actually therefore experiencing new things. Apart from that, just go and do it. Life's too short. I do live by that. Life's too short. Go out, have that adventure, do something a bit scary to push yourself and go and see what you can achieve. Don't underestimate the impact that being on an adventure, on a challenge, whatever that looks like to you, whether you're a disabled person, whether you're able-bodied, what community you're from, it doesn't matter. Don't underestimate the impact that having an adventure will have on your life at that time and then also moving forward.
Stephanie, thank you again for coming back on the Tough Girl Podcast Extra to share more of your journey and your story, and just best of luck with all your future adventures and challenges.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
Hey Tribe, I really hope you enjoyed that episode with Stephanie. What an absolute inspiration. Now, at the beginning of the podcast, we mentioned that we've previously spoken with Stephanie before. So Stephanie first came on the Tough Girl podcast on June 20th, 2023. And if you want to learn more about her backstory, then please do go and give that episode a listen. She shares more about going from an active full-time working mum and a keen horse rider to being a fully dependent on a wheelchair with complex health issues and requiring 24/7 care to support with everyday tasks. She talks about how it was life-changing, how with determination and incredible support network and having a passion for adventure that she ended up back in the saddle less than 2 years later. And she talks more about the importance of having a challenge, the Ride to Freedom challenge across the Pyrenees Mountains. So if you enjoyed this episode, please do go back and listen to that first episode, June 20th, 2023. Now, all of our podcast episodes are on the website at toughgirlchallenges.com. If you're particularly interested in horse riding or climbing or mountaineering or polars or ocean running, cyclists, triathlons, sailors, etc., then there is a resources section which is broken down into those different areas. So you can go and listen to all of the runners, all of the wheelchair adventurers, all of the women who've climbed Mount Aconcagua, for example. There is a lot of episodes on the Tough Girl podcast now. There's over 700 for you to choose from. And today is actually a special day as well. It is the 9th year anniversary of the Tough Girl podcast. The Tough Girl podcast has been going since the 4th of August 2015. And one of the ways that I celebrate that is by releasing 4 episodes, because we started with 4 episodes way back then. And if you haven't done so already, please do subscribe so that these episodes will automatically be downloaded to your listening device so that you will always have good quality adventure content to listen to. Thank you for all of your incredible support. Big shout out to all the patrons. If you'd like to support the work that I do, then please visit Patreon, patreon.com/Tough Girl Podcast. And you can help me to increase the amount of female role models in the media, especially in relation to adventure and physical challenges. Our next episode, which is coming out later on today, is with Geraldine McFall. She walked from home to Rome, an incredible story, an incredible journey, which I'm sure you'll absolutely love listening to. And then later on today, on the 4th of August, 7 p.m, we are speaking to Caroline Paul. She is author of Tough Broads, which shares more about boogie boarding to wing walking, how outdoor adventure improves our lives as we age. So an incredible book, an incredible story, an incredible woman, like all of our women that we have on the Tough Girl podcast. More information can be found at toughgirlchallenges.com. All that's left for me to say is, wherever you are, whatever you are doing, give it your all, give it 110%, get after it, go for it, believe in yourself, because I believe in you. Take care, lots of love, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.